Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. I believe we're all ready to start our second session. And today we will start the second session under the title of Defending Forward Cyberspace as a Domain for Conflict. And once again, we'd like to welcome you all to WESF 2023. Please be with us until the very end. And as you can see on the stage, we have our moderator and our panelists. And ladies and gentlemen, now please allow me to introduce our esteemed speakers. First, Dr. Kim Do-yeon, Adjunct Senior Fellow of Indo-Pacific Security Program of CNAS, who will be leading the discussion as moderator. So please welcome our moderator with a big round of applause. Thank you. And next, we're joined by His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Abdel Hafiz, Vice President of Cybersecurity Affairs of the National Telecom Regulatory Authority of Egypt. Please welcome him. Thank you. And today, we're also joined by Dr. Arvad Antwi Buasiako, Director General of Cybersecurity Authority of Ghana. Thank you, and please welcome him. And next, please allow me to introduce Dr. Mart Nurma, Director of NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. Please welcome him. Thank you for your attendance. And next, His Excellency Burhan Ghaffar, Ambassador of Singapore to the United Nations. He will be delivering his speech by pre-recorded video. Thank you in advance. And next on the stage, we're joined by Dr. Dan Smith, Director of Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, or SIPRI. Once again, please welcome him with a big round of applause. Thank you. Last but not least, Dr. Kim So-jung, Director of Emerging Security Studies of Institute for National Security Strategy of the Republic of Korea. Please welcome her with a big round of applause. Thank you once again. And with that introduction, our moderator, if you're ready, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I hope everybody had a delicious and wonderful lunch. While we are digesting, we will have the opportunity to digest a lot of intellectual firepower that's on this panel. We are very honored and privileged to have a very distinguished panel of experts, and we will just get right into it without any real framing and opening remarks because there's so much to cover today. And in the session panel, the title for today is Cyberspace as a Conflict of Domain. And some of these points have been alluded to and touched upon in the first session, but we're going to dive a bit deeper into this very important and timely topic. Over the past decade or so, cybersecurity threats in cyberspace really evolved. And of course, we talk about the difficulties of attribution and, early concerns about cyberspace really focused on disruptive and destructive attacks on critical infrastructure. And over the years, we have new technology that's coming into the mix. And so let's start with Dr. Ahmed. Could you please briefly describe the current global cybersecurity landscape, especially identifying what major threats you see today and going forward?
Hi, thank you for the organizer for having me there. But before answering your question, let me come back a little bit. While I was listening to keynote speakers, I noticed that most of the world leaders and the politicians are talking about technology. 20 or 30 years ago, nobody of them was talking about technology, which means that technology, which is evolving right now, has a big impact in our lives, in politics, in commercial, in every aspect of our life. Coming back to your question about the cybersecurity threats, the new emerging cybersecurity threats, there's a lot of cybersecurity threats coming in the past 5 years or 10 years. The most important one of them is ransomware attack. Ransomware attack is becoming very booming, and a few years ago, because of this wealth is getting a lot of money, the attacker getting a lot of money for the victims, And also, most of the organization doesn't know how to protect themselves against ransomware. We always saying them, you have to have some strategy for a backup to protect your data, since the data became the oil of the world right now, rather than the oil, the traditional oil. You know, the data right now becoming the most important asset all over the world. All of us dealing with the data, all of us dealing with the technology, for the technology transformation, for the governments, for the organizations, for the SMEs, for all of organizations dealing with digital transformation, which is the life of the people. But on the other side, the attacker has become evolving a lot and get a lot of expenses. For the attackers, last year it was cost the globe about $10.5 trillion. While we are spending in billions, our losses becomes in trillions, which means that we have to do a lot to withstand the cyber attacks. So the main question, why the cyber crimes have been increased? Because of the connectivity, because of the, all of us depend on our cell phone, for example. You know what? In past 10 years, there is a psychological disease called nomophobia. All of us fear about losing his cell phone, or the cell phone battery is going down. So it became a well-known disease, a psychological disease called nomophobia. All of the people right now, when we wake up, the first thing you look for, your cell phone. There's all your life in your cell phone. Your credentials, your bank accounts, your social lives, your email, your business, everything depending right now in the cell phone. And the statistics saying that the number of equipments belongs to everybody right now become 3.9 devices per person, including cell phone, wearable devices, laptop, PC, all these equipments has used for the technology. So the dependency of the technology, dependency of the digital life in every tiny details of our life, which helps the attacker to increase their cyber attacks to get a lot of money. So why I'm saying that if we are dealing with technology, we are depending on the technology, we should deal with the technology in a safe manner. Since the awareness for the people how to deal with the technology, with the social activities, your business, everything, we should deal with the technology in a safe manner. You should know how to save your contents, how you save your data as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And authoritarian states have increasingly blurred the line between state and non-state actors. So let's turn to Dr. Norma. I understand that one of your biggest concerns is a threat posed by or caused by APT groups. Could you please elaborate and explain to us why this is a particular concern for you?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So we at the Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, we unite 39 nations to be able to support our nations to be able to face cyber threats as a coalition. And along those lines, and I'm very happy to say that Korea also is a member, and many of your nations are members of our center. Along these lines, so first, what the cyber threats, main cyber threats are we are facing. So this typical list includes nation states and their geopolitical interest, terrorists and their ideological interest, criminals with their financial interests, thrill seekers seeking satisfaction, and insiders who are discontent with their organizations. So they are all different, and they can be very simple and very complex. So simple example is that most of the criminals are criminals. It's a common sense. They are criminals because they seek easy life. And the same applies in cyber. So in cyber criminals, most of the attacks are pretty straightforward, pretty simple. They are just trying to find the weakest organizations, weakest people. At the same time, on the other side of the scale are the so-called APTs, the Advanced Persistent Threat Groups, which already the name says they are very capable and they are posing continuous threat. That means behind these APTs or they can be nation states, there can be terrorist groups, even criminals can be behind these groups if they are very determined. But the complex the common nominator here is that this is the main adversary our cyber defense is dealing with, and the most complex enemy to our cybersecurity community. So who are the states behind these attackers? Most commonly, Russia and North Korea are attributed as owners or supporters of these APTs, or using the APTs as their cyber weapons. So I would explain or discuss a little bit this Russian behavior and the examples we have recently seen what Russia is doing through APTs. And they are continuously launching wide-scale cyber attacks against most of the nations in the world with different objectives. But during the last 2 years, so they have launched the war of aggression, conventional war against peace-loving people of Ukraine. And on cyber front, well, this war is the first time in human history where cyber war is one of the elements of this new war. And the cyber war is not only against Ukrainian peace-loving people, but also to all the nations who stand against the severe violation of international law by Russia in this war. But the good news is that while on the battlefield we see a lot of fighting and very complex situation, then in cyber front, Russia is clearly failing. And I can say it because of quantitative results and numbers. Ukraine is also a member of our center, and they have shared their latest numbers of cyber attacks and incidents with us. And I'm very happy to see that while in 2022, the first year of the war, Ukrainians saw the highest level of most critical attacks. I don't quote the number, but on this traffic light system, the red was really big number. Then this year, the number in the red section, the critical attacks against Ukraine, have decreased almost 10 times. At the same time, the least critical number of attacks has increased significantly, which means the total effort from Russian side pretty much has remained the same, but Ukrainian defense is so strong that rarely any of these attacks is classified as critical nowadays, because Ukraine is strong in fencing them off. So what is the reason why Ukraine is winning on the cyber front? There are 3 very clear lessons learned from this conflict. So first of all, Ukraine has been in cyber war, actually, or in a loose term of it, under cyber attacks since 2014. So they have had 9 years to increase their cyber defense capabilities. So they were not surprised by this cyber element in this conventional war. They are good. The second one, united support of the world nations, who politically and through different means are standing with Ukraine in their fight for freedom against the forces of evil. And the third, and this is maybe even the most critical component, is commitment of the world's leading IT industry to support of freedom and democratic values. And now when we thought that Russia has this huge cyber power, well, it was huge as compared to our kind of public capabilities of Ukraine or most of our other nations. But it really shrinks in comparison with the combined power of the industry of the free world. So the moment where Microsoft and others stood up to support Ukraine in the fight for freedom, Russia was destined to lose on the cyber front. So to summarize, I think our nations have good chance to prevail against attacks from the APTs as long as we continue standing united, and not only on paper, but in real life, we focus on everyday operational cooperation in cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you. And staying on the topic of APT groups sponsored by authoritarian states, let's turn to Dr. Kim. North Korea really checks off most, if not all, the boxes that we were just talking about today with the first 2 speakers. They've been using cyber crimes cryptocurrency theft to finance their nuclear weapons. We have not yet seen, I don't believe, any physical kinetic attacks through using tools in cyberspace, but there's still a big threat. Can you please elaborate to us and explain why is North Korea's activities such a big threat, and what keeps you up at night when it comes to North Korea's cyber operations?
Before start my answers, I should say thank you for the organizers to having me here, and it's really great to have participated in these conversations. And I'm definitely not very clear that the DPRK is failing, just like Mark said that Russia is failing, but I don't think North Korea is failing yet. So North Korea's emergence as a cyber threat stems from its strategic use of cyber operations to generate funds, evade sanctions, and advance its political goals. So they invested heavily in building a sophisticated cyber capabilities, and several key characteristics makes its cyber activities particularly dangerous. So firstly, North Korea's cyber operations are orchestrated and supported by the state. It is known that the Reconnaissance General Bureau oversees these activities. So utilizing specialized units like Bureau 121 and a state-sponsored hacker group like Lazarus, these characteristics distinguish it very differently from other countries. So with international sanctions and limiting its access to global financial systems, North Korea turned to cybercrime to obtain funds. They have engaged in various cyber activities like hacking banks and cryptocurrency theft, as you said, and conducting ransomware attacks to generate revenues estimated in billions. So North Korea hackers exhibit advanced capabilities and utilize techniques like spear phishing. IPT groups are known for their persistences, so targeted creating critical infrastructures and government, financial institutions, and crypto exchanges. So North Korean cyber activities has caused significant economic damages globally. So North Korea these days, cyber operations transcend borders, posing a threat to institutions and individuals worldwide. Their ability to conduct operations from remote locations allowed to them to remain elusive and difficult to track. So the combination of the state support and advanced technical expertise and financial motivations and global reach makes North Korea's cyber threat particularly dangerous. So their activities not only target financial system, but also pose a broader risk to international security, stability, and critical infrastructures. The shift toward the cryptocurrency-enabled crime has provided them with its essential means to finance their agendas while evading traditional financial restrictions and monitoring. And also these days, more closer relationship concerns me a lot. The concerns have arisen also regarding the emergence of a new political alignment and potential escalation of competition as North Korea demonstrates closer relationships with some countries. So various threats, including the securing technological competitiveness through intellectual property theft and influence operations capable of enduring social unrest, can happen in near future.
Thank you. And so it's not just North Korea's nuclear weapons program that's a global concern, but it's certainly their cyber operations and their cryptocurrency theft that is also a global concern for us all. Let's turn to Director Smith. Could you please explain the relationship or crossover between criminal acts and interstate hostility? Is there a distinction? And if there's confusion, what are the implications for the future governance of cybersecurity, cyberspace?
Yes, thank you very much for the question and for the pleasure and honor of being on this panel. The first question is there a distinction? And the answer is yes, because we're talking about different actors with different motivations. But is there a confusion? The answer is also yes, for two reasons. One is because the actors quite often have a double motivation and can be regarded as being essentially both criminal and acting on behalf of a state. But also because, if you like, at the sharp end, it comes to the question of attribution. You so often do not know what has actually happened. You do not know what actually caused it. I mean, in cyberspace, stuff happens. Things go wrong. We all experience that. We sometimes know exactly who's caused it. It's that little person that exists inside your computer whose job is to get in the way and mess up your life. We shout at the computer, and sooner or later it calms down. So we must have been right that there was somebody there who was messing us about. Very often, when there are incidents, there's a risk that there will be a kind of a response to something that is essentially as unreal as the little person existing inside your computer. That's to say that what is criminal could be, or thrill-seeking, to use Mats's term, could be interpreted as being a hostile act. And then if a hostile act has been undertaken, it could be that there is a temptation towards a retaliation. If not in cyberspace, then in diplomacy and perhaps more. So yes, there is a distinction, and yes, there is a confusion, and it is extremely important that we start to focus in further and more on understanding those differences. I think the question of attribution now is probably technically somewhat less demanding, less difficult than it was about 5 years ago, but it is still something that needs to be worked on more and needs to be worked out further. And it's not just, in this context, it's not just a regulatory framework that we need in a sense of laws and regulations and norms. We need a regulatory framework that includes process, so that there is a place to turn to start trying to share information, to pin down what it is that is actually happening, to clear up moments of confusion. We have this in real politics, we have it in real diplomacy, both formally and informally, and it's something that needs to develop, in my view, much more quickly and much more strongly and perhaps more transparently in relation to cyberspace as well.
Thank you. So that was a brief and very in-depth overview of the landscape. Let's dig a little bit deeper about these new technologies. Let's turn to Dr. Ahmed. What are the risks associated with the emergence of new technologies like AI? And I know we spent a lot of time in the first session on AI, but other technologies too, as well as IoT and quantum computing. What concerns you the most, and how do they impact cybersecurity?
If you are talking about the emerging technologies, there is a lot of emerging technology like IoT, cloud computing, 5G, AI especially for AI. As a cybersecurity guys, we got benefits from AI to speed up the processing for incident handling, to analyze and investigate a huge amount of data. But on the other side, the attackers get a lot of benefits from using AI. Even non-expert, not technical people, he may consult ChatGPT, for example, to build him an attack, to build him a ransomware or a virus or something like that. So AI has two faults, pros and cons. We got a benefit from AI, as I said, but on the other side, for the attackers, helps them a lot to invent a lot of and sophisticated attacks, which we're going to call it zero-day attack. As you may know, for the attacks as a cybersecurity guys, for any attack, for any incident, we get something like what a fingerprint of the attack, and to get some learned lesson, to learn other people to withstand this attack if this happened again. But if this is a new attack, there's a zero-day attack, which means that we never see it before. So it's what coming up from using AI. Since AI consulting a huge amount of data, he may come up with a new attack which we didn't see before. So I'm saying that I'm always saying working in cybersecurity is like a Mickey Mouse. So it's a sort of an art, not a science. Since the attacker has no methodology to follow it to make a new attack. The attacker such looking for every tiny details to may forget to withstand, to block it. So he's looking for any hole in your system, he's looking for any breach in your system and go through this hole. And he may be staying a long while, like a time pumping for, at a certain time, he may get a lot of data. So emerging technology makes the cybersecurity very tough, very hard For example, for the Industry 4.0, there's all smart X, in smart X, smart factories, smart cities, smart transportation, autonomous cars, self-driving cars, all these new technologies make the landscape of the attacks very, very wide. So make our life is very difficult to overcome this new emerging technology with new attacks. Since the technology is coming up without a standard, without give us an opportunity to regulate how to use this emerging technology. We are in a race with the new technology. For example, 5G is not standardized yet, but it has been used all over many countries using 5G right now. But there is no framework how to secure, how to be safe using 5G, for example. Cloud computing as well. All the emerging technology should have a framework how to use it in a secure manner, which we are struggling to come up with this framework, but we couldn't afford. Every day is a new technology, every day is a new way to use this technology, so we are struggling with the emerging technology to protect our wealth for digital transformation.
Thank you. Dr. Norma, how are AI and other new technologies, and you can choose whichever one you'd like, increasing strategic stability or increasing instability? How are they helping both offenders and defenders?
Well, predicting the future is a very complex thing, and unfortunately, my background is in physics. I used to be a space professor. Unfortunately, I was not astrology professor, because this way I could predict the future. But now I only try, what I could do, I could apply some physics models and predict one of three ways how the future will go in regard of our society and AI. One of these three will happen. So, you know, from the high school physics, what is equilibrium? Equilibrium is something when, well, the system is when it's balanced. And in physics, there are like three different types. One type is stable equilibrium, and this happens when we have like an object, like a bottle, in the bottom of a well, like here on my arm. So if there is a disturbance that tries to move it out, my hand will redirect it back to the center. So the other option is unstable equilibrium. It's when I would put the bottle on my fist. Whenever there is a disturbance, it would push the bottle aside, it would fall, and something would cause some huge change. And the third is a neutral equilibrium, which is when we have the bottle on a flat surface, and if there is a disturbance, then it will just stabilize, most likely in a new position. So now let's replace physics with society and AI. Society, like the bottle, AI is the most significant disruption humankind will ever see throughout the past and the future. So that is a disturbance. So which scenario would we like to have? Do we have this, want to have this stable equilibrium? Probably no, because AI also brings along a lot of good things for the society. So we shouldn't block all the changes that AI is bringing to us. So do we want to have this unstable equilibrium? No, because in society and AI it would mean complete chaos, the Third World War, some destruction of our society, how our society behaves. So what we should be aiming at is this neutral type of equilibrium where we allow AI to make its move, and we are able to stop in a new advanced position and continue from there. So bringing us back to the cyber defense and cyber security, then quite clearly what we talk about is resilience. Resilience now is a force determining will chaos happen, or will we stabilize soon in a new and a better world. And this keyword, resilience, means that we should be ready for known and unknown effect effects throughout all society, but most importantly in our discussion in cyber security and cyber attacks. So we need to be ready and understand what the cyber effects are, what are the information warfare effects based on these cyber tools, new opportunities, and most importantly, what is the cognitive outcome of these operations and how this influences all our society. And it's simple to be prepared for known changes, but in case of AI, I would argue that most of the final effects of these developments are unknown. So the only thing that helps here is our mental readiness to accept unknown consequences, not rush into prohibiting everything, but instead always try to find out the best possible way out of the emerging situations. And this, once again, requires mostly the cooperation between our nations and willingness to openly discuss all new situations happening. Thank you.
Director Smith, when we're talking about automation and new technologies, and when we connect this with hard security issues, let's take, for example, nuclear issues or nuclear deterrence issues, do new technologies like autonomy and AI make deterrence or nuclear deterrence more effective, or do they undermine deterrence? What are the risks that you see? What scares you or worries you the most? Or could these new technologies actually be usefully integrated and carefully and safely be integrated into hard security issues like nuclear operations?
I think it's a given that technologies are as good or as bad as they're used. So it is perfectly possible for artificial intelligence and for the techniques under that heading to have a truly destructive effect on nuclear deterrence. If you're asking what my nightmare about that is, it's not the one that was raised earlier on of autonomous nuclear weapons, though I agree that is nightmarish. But I think it is something which is closer, which is generally known as left-of-launch hacking. That's to say, getting into the IT systems of a nuclear-armed state before weapons are launched, either to precipitate a launch, which I think is the kind of thing you sometimes see on films. Hollywood has done a few nightmares on that basis. Or, of course, to disrupt a state's nuclear weapons and perhaps to undermine their own confidence in them and thus to undermine a deterrent effect. But on the other hand, one can also see artificial intelligence being used in a way that could, for example, support a new generation of arms control. Because the thing about artificial intelligence, and at least about machine learning under that heading, is that you are able to handle huge amounts of data much more quickly. And we often assume that if huge amounts of data are being handled much more quickly, then the human decision time which is available is much shorter. But that's not necessarily the case. It's only the case if you decide that that is how you will use it. If you generate a large amount, or if you're covering a large amount of data and you're processing it very fast, then perhaps you're also gaining extra time for decision to be taken, for there to be thought and reflection. I think it's always worth remembering the case of what was seen on Soviet computer screens. I think it was back in 1983 as a nuclear attack. And it took somebody, he just thought that it was not a very credible scenario that one nuclear weapon would be being launched, and he decided not to treat it as that. He thought of it as a computer malfunction. When then the picture came through with some more missiles, he thought it was still a computer malfunction. That was his judgment. He was right. And one of the reasons why we're alive today is because of the action that Soviet colonel took some 40 years ago. So this issue has existed for a time. There's always been a pressure on fast human reaction time. It's possible for artificial intelligence to buy more time for that. So it just depends, in some sense, it depends how it's used. So unfortunately, the answer to your questions, again, is two yeses. Yes, it could be awful, but yes, it could actually have a quite positive effect.
positive effect if we can come to some agreement,
Yes, and if-
domestically but also internationally.
Obviously, domestic opinion needs to be on board with this, but the more chance there is to treat, the more chance there is to actually talk with adversaries, the more chance there is to come to a stable relationship. In order to lock that stability in place, artificial intelligence could be an enormously important part of that. But if the politics, the geopolitics are unstable and toxic, then you can easily see the scenarios by which the artificial intelligence helps us go in utterly the wrong direction.
So you've provided one good idea of what to do, and so that's the next question. So what? So how do we deal with and deter and impose costs upon malicious cyber operations? Dr. Kim, when it comes to North Korea really is a really good case study for so many of these issues. But what should South Korea and the international community do to impose costs to deter North Korea's malicious cyber operations and cryptocurrency theft? What have we been doing that's worked well, that you are satisfied with, but what areas can we do better in?
Okay, again, the DPRK issues, then maybe I can say first that in 2002, over 20 years ago, when I just started the cybersecurity issues as my career, whenever I say we need the international corporations and domestic corporations, then everybody says, what for, why? At the time, DPRK, the problem is only the domestic problems, not an international problem at all. So we didn't see any possibility or the opportunity to having a good relationships or cooperations among states. But in the reality, we see there's need and criticality and importances of the corporations in here. So maybe I can say some what has been done very successfully and what can be done after. So in two parts. So the first of all, maybe regarding the DPRK's cryptocurrency theft, after our the ROK and US summit in 2022, two governments operated the cybersecurity working group on DPRK. So they are mainly dealing with two issues. So the first one is the stopping the IT profit workers of DPRK to work in abroad. That gives a lot of money for them to send back to their government. So the second issue was the cyber cryptocurrency theft. So for that purpose, we organized and operated and met like 4 or 5 times since the May of 2022, and they do a lot of things together. So those working groups not only composed by the foreign affairs, but also with the intelligence services and ICT ministries and cyber command, and also the secret service kind of, the financial sectors. So they all together, of course, the law enforcement agencies, they all came together and talked very frankly and shared the information very frankly, and they can deter the malicious acts regarding the cyber cryptocurrency theft of the DPRK. So it helped and it succeeded. So that's why these days we see that the DPRK is changing their cashing out points into some other countries, which we're going to have difficulties to make them not the DPRK make the currencies cash out. So maybe there can be a good successful stories of the Korean cases. And then secondly, these days in 2023, after a summit again with the Korea and US, we agreed to have this strategic cybersecurity cooperation framework between two countries. And after the trial meeting in Camp David in 2023, in August, we also tried to expand that strategic framework, including Japan. In November, our government also said that the UK government and our government agreed to have somewhere similar the strategic framework to cooperations in this way. So those kind of steps we're going to be very further, very fruitful for us to deter the DPRK's malicious activities. But what should be done after this is not sure about that. Maybe we need more information sharings, and maybe we need some kind of joint researches on how we can deter in technically and politically. The compliance and regulations cannot solve every problem, so we need the real solutions for that. So maybe those kind of things also should be considered in the futures, and also maybe not sure about the norm processes at the UN levels, but if we can have some kind of concrete norms in cyberspace for secure and open and stable cyberspaces, then it also can be helpful. Then maybe we can also think about having diplomatic dialogue with the DPRK to talk with them. So that can be the answers for the futures.
So let's take a little step back and zoom out a little bit. Let's go back to Director Smith. Is deterrence possible in cyberspace, or how should we be thinking about cyber deterrence? Should we be thinking about it in the way that we think about nuclear deterrence, or should we be thinking about it in terms of shaping behavior, perhaps along a spectrum of possible attacks through a series of efforts?
Yeah, I think this is a very difficult question. There are essentially two models of deterrence. One which we usually think about when we're thinking about, say, nuclear weapons or strategy in general, and one which we usually think about when we're thinking about crime and deterrence of crime. And the two models cross over, as you will see as soon as I express them, but there is a distinction between them. The first one is retaliation. You attack me, I attack you. And the second one is punishment. You commit a crime, and if you steal money from me, I don't steal money back from you. Rather, somebody else comes along, arrests you, and puts you in prison. So the punishment is not the same as the crime, only in reverse. That's the difference. Now, if you think about cyberspace, both the idea of retaliation, especially given all of the crossover and attribution issues that existed, that we discussed before. Retaliation is a difficult thing to think through there. Punishment is also a difficult thing to think through because the actors are likely to be right outside your own framework of law and possibility to, track them down, arrest them, and punish them. So deterrence is in either way that you want to think about it. It's a very difficult thing to think about in cyberspace. Now, I understand that one of the reasons why there is a lot of kind of reservation about how far to take sharing of information in cyberspace, how far to go with regulation, is because of this sense that it's not just defensive capabilities which are important, but offensive, which means that there is some kind of emphasis in Western strategic thinking on deterrence in cyberspace. But I think it is a very, very unreliable basis on which to think. So I think that there is no real alternative, difficult as it is, to thinking about that development, which we've been talking about already today, of norms, of laws based on norms, of a regulatory framework, which, as I said in an earlier comment just now, must include a process framework as well as a framework of laws. That is the only way in which I think it's going to be possible really to handle the issues. Whether there is then some chance to use completely other means in a different kind of space, so to speak, to address those states that do not wish to be inside the regulatory framework, that would be another question. Is there a chance for using economic measures to impose a degree of sanction on states that do not want to cooperate in what is otherwise a very close to universal system of framework, thinking far ahead into the future? Obviously, if that state was on a superpower scale and was holding, with all of its economic weight, was standing outside of a consensus, that's a very difficult prospect to think of how you sort of sanction a USA or a China if it doesn't want to go along with everybody else's consensus. But if you're thinking about smaller states, and what are, then in that light often called rogue states, then it's much more straightforward to think about a largely consensus global framework with pressure on those who do not want to come inside it. And I think the final thing to say from my perspective, that would be flawed, right? But it wouldn't be as seriously flawed as having no regulation and as relying on deterrence and arbitrary punishment with attribution very unclear in a semi-chaotic cyberspace environment. So I think we have to aim for something that regulates and controls to a degree, knowing that it will be flawed, but it being flawed is better than it being chaos.
Dr. Norma, there are concerns that Russia might escalate in and through cyberspace and cause effects similar to armed attacks in a post-armed conflict environment. And many experts also do not rule out China as a concern in this possible scenario. How should NATO and the international community prepare for such cyber intrusions and these types of potential scenarios?
So I think when thinking systematically, there are three major steps everybody needs to take. So first is cooperation. Second is cooperation. And you already know what the third is, right? The cooperation. So we are as strong as we can individually as nations or agencies inside the nation. But we are so much stronger if we have efficient national coordination and cooperation inside the nation, that civilian, military, academic, private stakeholders play together under a coordinated cybersecurity strategy. And then if we multiply that with international cooperation, then when we look at the numbers and if most of the nations would agree on that, maybe under the frameworks that Dan just described and principles Dan described, I think this is a way forward where we all can enjoy the benefits of more secure cyberspace, secure internet that everybody needs for our societies to develop. So how can we achieve this cooperation? And again, there are three phases of developing this cooperation. And here actually there is nothing special, it's a common sense. If you want to cooperate with your neighbor, build a fence together, something like that, it's always the same. So the first step is that you need to know your partner. You need to understand their capabilities, their backgrounds, their interests, and so on and so on. And I can tell that this forum here is an excellent vehicle which brings our nations together. We talk to each other, we share our experiences, we know each other better when we go home from here. The second step, based on this knowledge, we can start building trust. And trust comes from, not from just speeches and papers. It comes through actual operational cooperation between agencies, between national stakeholders, between our nations. And this is very important here, that it's not just something we plan for the future. It's not like we can hold our ground as a nation, but if we get into a trouble, then we will cooperate with you and you call you to help us. Well, the problem with this approach is, well, it's kind of the standard approach nowadays. So the problem is it might send a very wrong message to the adversaries. And we have seen this happening in Ukraine. The main failure in Ukraine was a failure of deterrence, sending a clear message to Putin that the moment you cross borders, you violate international law, then the moment most of the world will be united against this aggression and will come to support the nation in need. If Putin would have known that before and known the reaction from the world, I really don't think that he would venture into this misfortunate situation. So once again, this not some cooperation in the future, but cooperation today, cooperation being in the core of our national capability in cyber. Our national capability is built on cooperation internally and international level. That is the most important step. And the third step is a will to cooperate in time of need. The will that if some of us will be under attack, or many of us, we will cooperate. We will exercise our trust and knowledge. But about the will, I'm pretty sure that if you trust your neighbor, and if you know your neighbor, if you trust your neighbor, then you also love your neighbor, and most likely you will go and help your neighbor when the neighbor is in need. So if we do all these steps, both national and internationally, then I honestly believe that we have done our best to stand ground, to fence off all potential aggression against international law and peace in cyberspace. But still, Earth can be hit by an asteroid, and we can't do anything about that. So there will be unexpected events, and only resilience is the best we can have. But we just shouldn't be too much concerned about these asteroids destroying the humankind. We can only do our best as humankind to stay united. And I'm so happy to see and say that Korea is really taking leadership in these processes, bringing international community together through exercises and conferences and discussions like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's turn to Dr. Antwi Boasiako. Are the tools and methods different when deterring criminals as opposed to states in cyberspace? And what steps and recommendations can be taken to make cyberspace safer and more secure for national security, essential services, and commerce?
Very well. Thank you, Madam Moderator, for giving me the opportunity. But first of all, let me express my appreciation to the government of the Republic of South Korea for the invitation, not just only to Ghana, but also the Global South. Permit me to put also the Global South agenda a little bit here. It's important because sometimes when discussions like this, we get lost. And if I can put this in context before I touch on the substantive matter. I think I agree with you that the cyberspace is a common good for all of us. But if you think about a developing country like mine, I think our interests are primarily economic. And let me give you, at least for now, and I think I need to be candid about it. If you look at a report by the International Trade Administration, about 500 million population on the African continent will be e-commerce users by 2025. That is a good indicator for us. At the same time, the United Nations Conference on Trade has also done assessment. By the same 2025, I think we're likely to add about 180 billion USD to the GDP of the region. And in my own country, there has been examples of experimentation whereby digital platforms being used to collect or mobilize revenue has increased revenue generation by four times. So if we're getting 1,000 USD a month, doing things manually, it is changed to 4,000 USD. We can't have a discussion on the security resilience of the digital or the global internet space without looking at the developmental context, which some of us is quite pretty for us in terms of how our development is. And that is why I wanted it to be situated squarely on agenda. I agree, of course, the cyberspace is a center of gravity for all sorts of things. As I mentioned earlier, one of them is economic opportunities. That government in my region and other similar places are taking advantage to develop their economies. But also, it's the same center of gravity for criminal activities. It's the same center of gravity for conflict and almost everything. And therefore, our response mechanisms in that particular area requires a multifaceted approach. Speaking about some of this development, Ghana hosted the Maiden Global Conference on Cyber Capacity Building, in which Accra Core document was launched. And again, it was the team that touches on the development. We hosted this event working with the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, Global Forum on Cyber Expertise, again, highlighting the developmental imperative of the global internet platform, which I do believe it should be situated, of course, in terms of the conflict, adversarial, and those issues. I think we need to look at that. In terms of substantive question as to how to deal with the threat in the cyberspace, I think we need to be clear. The cyber actors or adversaries are not the same. They are different. So you have purely criminal actors, but you also have state actors. And how to deal with this wouldn't be the same thing. Of course, when you're dealing with a criminal actor, I think first of all, and my own experience leading the National Cybersecurity Authority of my country, preventive measures are quite key. And I would like to look at awareness creation, and I think my colleagues here will admit we need to focus on awareness creation. Even wealthy countries are unable to successfully investigate, prosecute, and adjudicate more than 10, 15% to 20% of all cybersecurity incidents. I think the factors has been enumerated here, some of them attribution, identification, and also on and so. So awareness, preventive measures are key. And that is one area I will recommend. The second is the protection. And you need to be proactive, especially critical information infrastructure systems need to be protected. And for example, Ghana has designated close to 200 critical information infrastructure owners. We've introduced a directive for the protection of this, the baseline cybersecurity measures for their protection. That is key. But certainly, law enforcement as a deterrence is key. You need to be able to at least, even the small percentage, to be able to successfully cooperate with the private sector, investigate and prosecute it to also serve as a deterrence. So these are some of the measures I do believe, of course, with the information sharing with the private sector, and you can enforce the regulations, collaborate with law enforcement agencies to deal with the issue. From the state's perspective, I do believe there are a number of options. I'm not sure whether this has been touched, but imagine a tool to address issues involving state actors in cyber diplomacy. I think that is where to start on. I think the world is emerging to a point where we need to dialogue. We need to negotiate to establish relevant cyber norms. And I think that is an important tool that we need to promote. And I think the OEWG and the ad hoc committee engagement at the UN is quite a good model to respond to that. We need to, one way or the other, have to engage, no matter how difficult and tough it is, to sit down, dialogue, and agree as human beings in terms of the rules of engagement, even as we operate in the cyberspace. But I think just negotiating and dialoguing, I don't think they will be compliant. There will always be elements, state actors, who will not comply even with the agreed norms. And therefore, I think the option of sanctions, of course, economic sanction can be applied as a tool as well in terms of mitigating destabilizing acts involving state actors. And of course, where also it is possible, military action comes in. But I think that is where we need to dialogue and establish whether the existing international rules apply to also certain state actions that are conducted within the cyberspace. I do believe there should be a conversation in terms of the application of international law to destabilize on actions by state actors. And I think these are the directions that we need to look at going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's an excellent segue into the next section. You know, we've been talking a lot about states, non-state actors, criminals, but the private sector is a key actor in this equation and key actor in the future of the governance of cyberspace. And so let's turn to Director Smith. Very briefly, what are the private sector's maybe 1 to 2 top responsibilities in the context of violent context, and what maybe 1 or 2 recommendations do you propose to strengthen cybersecurity or public, and especially public-private partnership in going at this together instead of in a siloed and disjointed manner?
Yes, thank you. So let's take a look at the war in Ukraine, where it's been mentioned already that a number of major and some not so major ICT companies have come forward and have assisted with Ukraine's defense in many ways. And those companies and their corporate leaders need to look very closely at international humanitarian law. And several of them are now in a dialogue and discussion about that. Because the big blunt question arises. I mean, if Microsoft is helping the Ukrainian government, if any corporation is, do they become actors in the war? If they become actors in the war, are they actually legitimate targets? What is the responsibility that the company has to ensure the safety of its employees and, of course, in the corporate context, the value to the shareholders? What's their liability? How compliant must they be? This is a set of questions which has been opened up by something which I think is genuinely unprecedented, which is this sort of surge of assistance towards the government in Kiev, especially in the first days, but it's been maintained ever since, when it faced that sort of ramped up aggression starting on the 24th of February last year. So that's one thing, that if you're asking, what are the implications and what should they do, they should understand there are implications and they need to explore them, and they need to explore them very urgently. Second thing, in a completely different set of contexts, is, Ukraine and Gaza, these are 2 wars out of about 55 or 56 that are going on at the moment. And in many of those conflict-affected countries, companies, ICT companies like others, have not a role, but they have a presence in those countries. Sometimes it's only a virtual presence, but very often they have offices there and staff and so on. And we've been in discussion with them about what it is that they need to do and to be paying attention to in the context of imminent conflict, active violent conflict, and in the post-conflict period. And it boils down to really understanding the context in which they're working. It's what in the trade, in peace research and in the development community would be called a conflict-sensitive approach. But what that really means is a risk-sensitive approach, but two-way risk. Not just the risk that the difficult context poses for the company and its well-being and the well-being of its employees and customers and so on, but the risks which the company might generate in that country, very often without any intention. I mean, these contexts are sometimes very complex, and without very, very good local intelligence, you can do something which appears to put you on one side of the conflict, even though you didn't mean to, and then you become a target for the other side of the conflict. And that can work either way. It can be the government which acts against you to close down operations because it thinks you're a disruptive element, or the militia and the insurgents who act against you because they think you're pro-state. So again, it needs careful thinking about, careful analysis, and I would say that the key is to be conducting the analysis in a way that is well informed by local voices. If you're not engaging with local communities in the corporate sector, then you're really going to be uninformed about the potential consequences and ramifications of what you're doing. And that could run serious risks. It could run risks of kidnapping or of other and worse physical harm for your employees and for the executives. So those would be the two things I'd say. There's obviously, this is a big field once you get into it, but analysis and understanding, looking at legal and moral responsibilities, That, I think, is the starting point of the whole enterprise.
Let's look at the other case study here of North Korea again. Dr. Kim, how can the private sector help in reining in North Korea's cybercrimes? And how can governments also partner with, or better partner with the private sector in this endeavor?
Oh, absolutely. Without the private sector's help, the deterring the cryptocurrency theft from the DPRK will not be possible, actually. We got help from our domestic private sectors and experts, and also we got help from the international or the other countries' private sectors, whom they have good skills on following up all the tracks of the cryptocurrencies coming from here to there, and following up all the tracks, and then the final the stops at the cashing out there. So they follow up all the tracks, and then they could share all the information with our government, intel services, and the law enforcement at the same time. So I cannot say that I cannot stress more that we need the private sectors for this kind of help. But there is still some concerns I have as a researcher, because the technical dependencies or technical gaps among the private sectors, domestically and internationally, gives more chances to the concentration of the information or skills and personnel. So when a company has more information or skills than every other sectors, then that the concentrated the information more information companies will gonna play a greater role to make rules and guidelines to do something with the government or by themselves. So I'm not sure how we can make them as legal and as ethical, as moral as we expected. So that can be one concern for me. And secondly, regarding the DPRK cases, the other countries' private sectors can cooperate with directly the Korean governments, but in sometimes the private sectors from the other country wanted to directly cooperate with the private sector or private companies in Korea directly. In that cases, the technical or information gaps gives little chance for Korean private sectors to cooperate very well, and in some cases, it only have very little chances to express their opinions or their specialties toward the government policy-making processes. So they can also cause some kind of resistances to cooperate in more voluntarily way. So that can be the second problem I see. And also, in general term, with the cases of the Russian-Ukraine cases, in other Gaza war cases, we see a lot of private experts and professionals are involved in the war itself, and we are not sure how we see them as just non-state actors or the private citizens or the state-sponsored players or just the criminals. We don't know yet, and we could not make decisions them as their characteristics. And then how we can make guidelines or regulations or norms considering regarding their activities. Then if we are not agreed, then all the activities in between the world, the private sectors or private experts' activities will be on private revenges. So we are not, I don't think we can be satisfied with that situations. So maybe we need those kind of understanding too. And also, finally, that's why I think the CCTV COE platform is really, really good for not only for the government, but also including the private sectors in a very strategic and procedural way to help doing something together. So maybe we can, I know that the CCTV COE has only the government sectors as the players, but maybe we can have some kind of portion to enlarge that into the cooperations with the private sector in a in a more protocol or the pre-decided manners, then the private sector's role can give more chances to help the others. That's all.
Thank you. Dr. Andre Boasiako, you alluded to a couple of these points, but how can governments work with companies, private companies, civil society, whole of society to catch these criminals better, to prevent cyber crimes, and what specific suggestions do you have in taking this whole of society approach to strengthen cyberspace governance? And perhaps if you could also, allude or draw upon Ghana's experience and your own experience in this, in protecting critical information infrastructures.
Thank you once again. I think, again, Ghana and, of course, most of the developing countries, something positive is happening there. When you're late to do something, I think you learn and you improve. I think the starting point is the governance structure. I think I've seen governance, cybersecurity governance models working very well, similar to what Ghana has adopted. So the right of the development of the strategy or your national legislation, you need to integrate both state actors and also non-state actors. It's very important, to get things right. So, for example, if you take up Ghana's contest, Section 13 of our law established the Joint Cybersecurity Committee. So we have a number of domestic agencies whose mandate borders on cybersecurity, and therefore they constitute this body. But you've also set up industry forum, Section 82, that will bring non-governmental actors all together. And we work closely together on those matters, of course, including the civil society. And I think we've progressed, and we've gotten the domestic operation pretty well, and that is quite been helpful, not only responding to cybersecurity challenges, but also through our international cooperation partners. Because if Ghana is a state party to the Budapest Convention, and a state party like the US or UK has made a request for records from a telecommunications service provider, and you don't have proper domestic arrangement, it will become very difficult even for you to exercise effective international cooperation. So that kind of process has been replicated in a number of developing countries. In terms of working together, yes, one strategy that Ghana has done, I think second to Singapore, is the licensing of cybersecurity service providers. Ghana is the first country on the continent and the second globally to have taken this approach. Not just cybersecurity service providers, but also cybersecurity professionals. There's a reason. When I relocated back to the country 12 years ago, setting up my firm, and the kind of information I had, the visibility I had, intelligence I had, conducting forensic in the banking sector and energy sector, the state didn't have this visibility, which I felt was totally wrong. So we needed to bring visibility to some of these actors, of course, establish their fit for purposeness, to not just their technical competency, but also in view of the intrusive nature of their work to establish that. That is helping in terms of the state where I sit. My agency also has the national set. In terms of attacks report, we receive them. And that help in terms of quickly responding to incident and also information sharing. That has been really good. Well, the concept we use is collaborative regulations, because sometimes when you use regulations, people walk back. Are you regulating me? It's not really regulating. It's just, look, let's sit down together. We have, I think the goal is the same, but we have differentiated responsibilities. The state has a responsibility to lead. It has a responsibility to implement enabling interventions. And of course, the private sector players who also hold data, who also have critical systems, have a responsibility to contribute to that. Where I sit, I think I find myself in difficult situations because I also deal with the national security side of things. You deal with civil society. All of them have competing interests, and all of them have genuine, legitimate, pragmatic interests. And I think my physics professor here made a point. It's a question of equilibrium, the balance that you'll be able to still put the necessary measures in place and protect the citizens through national security standpoint, but at the same time, you are also ensuring that the rights of individuals are protected. And this has been applied around the protection of critical information infrastructure within our setup. But also, one area which hasn't been discussed much is disinformation, which could be a potential source of conflict in the cyberspace. I'm not sure whether that area has been explored. But Ghana, we've seen that for us, disinformation is not just internet abuse, because we've seen how the population can attach certain genuineness and credence to disinformed information circulating around. And I think that is what my authority working with the agencies are also dealing with. But I do believe from the developing context, from the emerging democracies, if we're talking of emerging security, emerging democracy ought to be one of the areas we need to look at it. We need to address misinformation, as they could potentially undermine the integrity of electoral and democratic processes in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. Very important. Yes, disinformation campaigns is another critical area where the threats evolve. Dr. Ahmed, what specific measures and recommendations would you make to enhance and strengthen global cybersecurity resilience?
Yes, very good question, actually, since right now we didn't talk about the cybersecurity, we are talking about cyber resilience. The question is not, I might be attacked or not. The question is, when gonna be attacked, and when I be attacked, am I ready or not? So to enhance the cyber resilience, you have to work proactively through some frameworks, through some regulations. You ask the organization and SMEs, all the big organizations to follow, to be ready for being attacked. Don't wait when attack has been happening. You should be ready afterwards. So also we should cooperate, as my colleague said, cooperation. I prefer collaboration rather than cooperation. To be shoulder to shoulder rather than just cooperation. Collaboration between nations help us to withstand the zero-day attacks. So, for example, if any state or any nation had been attacked to a certain attack, if I have a collaboration with them, that's learning me how to be ready to face this attack afterwards, since there's some waves of attacks are coming to certain regions. So if I collaborate with my neighbors in my region or collaborate internationally with the whole nations all over the world, we will be able to reduce the risks of attacks, to overcome the risks of attacks, and reduce the money we're gonna lose for attacks. Moreover, as I said, always saying that cybersecurity is not just technical. We need a legal framework to help us to fulfill. For example, in Egypt, we have many laws to criminalize cyber activities, to help people to get that rights if they have been attacked, even in the social activities. So collaboration between nations, between neighbors, will help all the globe to withstand the cyber attacks, which has been evolving every day. So the final word is a collaboration.
And that's a good final word. No objection there, I suspect. One of our speakers mentioned in reference the UN OEWG, and the chairman of the working group, Ambassador Bruhan Gafour, was unable to join us in person, but he did want to send very brief remarks by video, and he wants to relay the outcomes of the annual progress report that was adopted in July by consensus. And if you can please have the video. Thank you.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, greetings from the United Nations in New York. I'm honored to speak to you today in my capacity as chair of the United Nations Open-Ended Working Group on the security of and in the use of ICTs, also known as the OEWG for cybersecurity. I want to begin by thanking His Excellency Mr. Park Jin Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea, for inviting me to participate in the 2023 World Emerging Security Forum. And I would also like to recognize and commend the initiative of the government of the Republic of Korea for bringing the international community together today to have this important and timely conversation on emerging security issues, particularly given the pace and speed of recent developments in this domain. The third area where there was agreement was that UN member states took the step of deepening international understandings on how international law applies in cyberspace. Now, international law and how it applies in the cyber domain is one of the most challenging discussions at the UN. It is also a very important issue given that it is really vital for all of us to ensure an international order in cyberspace that is founded on rules and international law. While some states believe that additional legally binding obligations are crucial, other states have also taken the view that existing international law is sufficient. And therefore, this discussion and debate will have to continue in the context of the open-ended working group, and it is my commitment to encourage this conversation so that we can all have clarity about how international law applies in the domain of cyberspace. The fourth area where states have reached agreement is on measures to intensify cyber capacity building efforts. Now, many member states have also said that capacity building is also in some ways a confidence building measure, because when one provides support to another country, one is also establishing a relationship of trust and building confidence. Now, there are many international organizations such as the ITU, UNDP, and World Bank, which are playing an important role in providing capacity building assistance in the context of cybersecurity. The question is how we can leverage on what is already existing and identify the gaps where more needs to be done in order to prepare states technologically and also politically and a policy point of view to deal with the emerging threats. Now, in this regard, UN member states have decided to convene a global roundtable on ICT security capacity building, which will take place at the United Nations in New York on the 10th of May 2024, and I hope that many of you will be able to participate in this global roundtable. Now, the fifth and perhaps the most significant step taken this year is the agreement reached by UN member states to begin work to set up a global points of contact directory for ICT security. Now, the global point of contact directory is expected to be fully functional in 2024, and the directory can be used as a mechanism to communicate with each other in the event of an ICT security incident that could potentially escalate and lead to concerns about international peace and security. This directory will help states in their efforts to fulfill their obligations under the framework for responsible state behavior, which often require close communication with other states. The idea of a global POC directory was raised many years ago, and it has finally become a reality because this year UN member states have made an important step to proceed to further implement it as soon as possible. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, to put it simply, the UN has made some important progress in the area of ICT security. And I understand that in your discussions today, you will be reflecting on key questions in terms of what else needs to be done, including what trends will define the future of cyberspace and how cyberspace should be governed, and how governments and stakeholders can work together to promote a safe and secure cyberspace. As you deliberate on these questions, I encourage you to build on the work that has been done at the United Nations so far. It is really important that all efforts at the regional level, at the national level, contribute to strengthening the common agreement that have been reached at the United Nations. And therefore, whatever we can do to further strengthen and operationalize the framework of rules, norms for responsible state behavior in cyberspace will be an important contribution to our collective security and to the work of the United Nations. Now, in this regard, I also want to invite you to think about how any conclusions and understandings that you reach today in your conference could be formulated in a very specific way, either as proposals and recommendations that could then feed into the work of the UN Open-Ended Working Group. This would ensure that your conversations today could also lead to important discussions here at the United Nations and create a lasting impact and contribute to our efforts to strengthen the framework for responsible state behavior with the ultimate aim of enhancing international peace and security.
Well, we could spend many more hours unpacking this very complex issue of cyberspace as a domain for conflict, but I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much to our distinguished panelists for sharing your wisdom and enlightening us and making us smarter today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please give a big round of applause. Thank you to our moderator and our esteemed panelists. Now please to return to your seats. Thank you.